I first noticed her in the quiet corner of the café, where the late afternoon sunlight cut through the dust motes like shards of gold. She was reading a notebook, pen hovering, fingers lightly drumming, as if she were keeping time with a melody only she could hear. And yet, the moment our eyes met, it felt as if someone had plucked the air between us. Taut, vibrating. She was effortless, graceful in a way I couldn't quite name. Her hair caught the light in shades of chestnut and honey, falling over her shoulder in a careless, perfect sweep. There was confidence in the tilt of her chin, but the barest trace of hesitation in her eyes. A softness I wanted to explore without words. I sat across from her, pretending to read a book I wasn't actually looking at. My fingers traced the rim of my coffee cup, and every time she shifted, every subtle movement, it was as if gravity subtly pulled me closer. The brush of her hand against mine as she reached for her cup was accidental, but my pulse betrayed me. That brief contact, just fingertips grazing, left a warmth I couldn't ignore. "You've been staring," she said suddenly, a hint of amusement in her voice, but the smile didn't reach the small crease near her eye. "I wasn't," I said, fumbling, though my gaze had never left her. She laughed softly, low, a sound that filled the small space between us, curling into the edges of my chest. There was no rush, no declaration, just this magnetic tension that hummed like a quiet storm. Her perfume, a faint mix of vanilla and something woody, settled in my senses, sharp and comforting all at once. She leaned back, tilting her head just slightly, studying me as though weighing the quiet honesty behind my eyes. I caught the way her fingers drummed the table, then paused, hovering in midair, as if she were holding herself back. Every motion of hers was deliberate, even when it appeared casual, and I felt myself drawn into the orbit of her presence. I wanted to speak, to say something clever or insightful, but the words tangled in my throat. Instead, I watched, the small rise of her shoulder as she breathed, the quick flash of her smile, the faint line of worry at her temple. And she noticed, I think, because her gaze lingered just a fraction longer than necessary, like she might lean across the table and close the gap entirely. The café was nearly empty, the soft hum of conversation and the clink of cups fading into a background soundtrack for this silent exchange. My hand twitched slightly, unconsciously moving closer to hers, though I didn't touch. She shifted, leaning just enough that I could feel her warmth radiate across the small space, and my chest tightened. There was a gravity here that neither of us had named yet, but that we both felt. Then, just as my courage began to swell, just as I thought maybe she would reach out first, the door opened. A sudden gust of cold air swept in, rustling napkins, jangling cups, and pulling her attention away from me. She glanced toward the entrance, a flicker of distraction in her eyes, and in that moment, the spell broke, the tension suspended. But the air between us remained charged, unspoken, and I knew that whatever had begun here, in these quiet, golden moments, would not stay quiet for long. The next time I saw her, it wasn't in the quiet cafe corner, but at a local bookstore tucked behind a street that smelled faintly of rain and asphalt. She was kneeling in the travel section, flipping through a worn copy of Letters to a Young Poet, and I couldn't help but notice the way her fingers lingered on the pages, as if memorizing the texture as much as the words. I hesitated before approaching, pretending to examine a nearby shelf of photography books. The truth was, I wanted to study her. The subtle crease between her brows when she read, the slight tilt of her head when she paused, without her knowing I was watching. There was an unspoken hesitation between us, a silent acknowledgement of something that shouldn't, maybe couldn't, exist. I had learned, slowly, that she carried a careful armor. She spoke lightly of past relationships, never lingering on details, just enough to hint at the loneliness that had shaped her. She'd been burned before, she'd said once, by people who couldn't see her beyond what she appeared to be. Confident, capable, composed. And maybe that was why she lingered near me in those quiet spaces. Curious, testing, but never quite letting go. The age gap between us hovered in every glance and every pause. 20 years wasn't just a number. It was the invisible barrier that made her cautious and me careful. I wanted to reach for her, to bridge it with a touch, but I feared the world's judgment, the whispered assumptions and the awkward stares. Even so, the pull was undeniable. Her presence always had a gravity I couldn't ignore. As she straightened from the shelf, her arm brushed mine. Accidental, I hoped, though my chest betrayed the sharp jolt that ran through me. She looked up, catching my gaze, and held it just a second too long, the tiniest twitch of a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. That small, fleeting contact was enough to ignite the quiet fire between us. We moved through the aisles, neither speaking much, but the tension hummed in every shared glance. I noticed the subtle way her breath would catch when I laughed softly at something she said, the way she leaned just slightly closer as if the space between us wasn't enough. And yet, she would pull back just before any line was crossed, keeping the boundaries blurred, tantalizing, and charged. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said, voice light, casual, but her shoulder brushed mine again. Longer this time, intentional or not, I couldn't tell. I felt the warmth, close, almost overwhelming. "Neither did I," I admitted, trying to sound normal, though my fingers itched to close the distance. There was a pause. A quiet beat where the noise of the bookstore receded, and it was just us. Just the faint scent of her perfume, the whisper of her hair brushing my arm, the unspoken acknowledgement of what neither of us dared to name. My hand itched to linger, hers didn't retreat immediately, and in that suspended moment, the fragile thread between us pulled taut. Then she smiled, softly, almost shyly, and leaned just a fraction closer. I could feel her breath, light and warm against my cheek, and in that instant, the rules, the hesitation, the judgments of the world outside, all of it melted away, leaving only the electricity between us, sharp and undeniable. It was late evening, the soft hum of the city outside the apartment window a distant murmur. She had invited me over, she said, just to help her sort through some old books and letters, but the apartment smelled faintly of her, warm vanilla and sandalwood, and the intimacy of the small space made it impossible to ignore the tension simmering between us. I was crouched on the floor, stacking leather-bound journals, when I felt her presence just behind me. The warmth radiating from her made my skin prickle. She leaned down to pick up a book I had just set aside, and her hair brushed my cheek. I froze, a low thrum of awareness pulsing through me, and she froze too, our breaths catching in the same rhythm. "I didn't realize there were so many," I said, voice hoarse even to my own ears. "You always notice the small details," she murmured, her hand lingering on the spine of the book, just inches from mine. That brush, that near touch, was electric, a conversation of its own. My chest tightened. We worked in silence, side by side on the floor, but the quiet was heavy. Every accidental graze, every glance that lasted a heartbeat too long, made it impossible to ignore the gravity between us. I was painfully aware of the line we were skirting, aware of how the world would judge, how precarious everything felt. Yet I couldn't pull away. She leaned closer to read something I was pointing out, and the warmth of her shoulder pressed against mine. Then the phone on the counter buzzed. She jumped slightly, as if startled, and I caught a flash of guilt cross her face. We both laughed nervously, pretending the sudden interruption was nothing, but the moment had shifted. Someone could have walked in, someone could have seen. That almost embarrassment made the tension sharper, a knife edge that left us more aware of each other than ever. "I should probably check that," she said softly, picking up the phone. "It's fine," I said quickly, though my words felt empty. I didn't want her to move away, didn't want the space between us to widen. We returned to the floor, close again, and I could feel her breath when she leaned to flip a page. The faint, warm exhalation tickled my skin. My pulse hammered, each heartbeat screaming that we were teetering on the edge of something forbidden. I wanted to close the distance, to taste that hesitant tension, but the very awareness of it made my hands shake. Our knees brushed. Her hand, meant to reach for a book, hovered a fraction of an inch from mine. I saw the same hesitation mirrored in her eyes, a silent agreement that what we were doing was dangerous, exhilarating, and entirely magnetic. Time seemed to slow. One quick glance, one half-smile, one stolen breath, and the pull between us was unbearable. She leaned closer, ever so slightly, and I felt the soft press of her chest against mine, though we both froze, too aware of the consequences to go further. Yet in that suspended moment, despite the fear, the hesitation, the guilt, we were closer than ever, closer than we had ever been. The rain began as a soft whisper against the window, then grew into a steady rhythm, drumming against the glass like a heartbeat. We were in her apartment again, the dim light casting shadows that danced across the walls, isolating us from the world outside. I could feel it in the air. Something had shifted, something unspoken teetering on the edge. She stood by the window, arms crossed, though her posture betrayed tension, a slight tremor in her shoulders. I was only a few feet away, and every nerve in me hummed with anticipation. I wanted to reach out, to close the distance, but fear gripped my chest. Fear of what this meant, what we were risking, what we might break. "Why do you keep coming back?" she asked suddenly, voice low, almost strangled, like she was holding something in. I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I shouldn't, but I can't stop." Her lips parted slightly. A flicker of something, anger, longing, crossed her face. She took a step closer, and I felt her warmth brush against mine, the faint scent of her perfume enveloping me. My hand itched to reach for her, to touch her hair, her face, anything that would let me feel closer. She let her hand linger near my arm as she moved past me. The brush of her fingers against my skin sent shivers racing up my spine. I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself, but every instinct in me screamed to close the gap, to lean in and let the world slip away. "Do you even realize what this is?" she asked, her voice trembling, just enough to let me hear the fear beneath the calm. "Do you know how dangerous it could be? For both of us." "I don't care," I said, voice low, breath shaky. "I just know I can't not care. Not anymore." The words hung between us, heavy, impossible to ignore. Her hand moved, brushing hair from her face, and I wanted to catch it, to hold it, but my fingers hovered just above her skin, trembling. She leaned slightly against me as she spoke, the warmth of her body pressing softly into mine. My chest ached, my pulse thundered. "Do you really feel the same?" she asked, eyes searching mine, the vulnerability barely masked behind her confident posture. "I do," I whispered, and then, as if drawn by the same invisible force, I leaned closer, every inch deliberate, careful, trembling. She mirrored me, a fraction behind, teasing the line we had danced around for weeks. Time slowed. I could feel her breath on my cheek, the heat radiating from her skin. My lips hovered near hers, the world shrinking until there was nothing but us, nothing but the suspended possibility of what could come next. And then, the phone rang. Sharp, insistent, breaking the spell. She flinched, and I stepped back, our closeness fractured, the air between us buzzing with unspoken desire, tension, and frustration. But the pull remained stronger than ever. I thought we had navigated the tension, skirted the edge without falling. But life, it seemed, had other plans. She had invited me to meet her at the small park behind her apartment, the one with the iron benches and the old oak that smelled faintly of earth after rain. The air was crisp, the scent of wet leaves sharp, and the sky bruised with the last light of day. "I need to tell you something," she said before I could even greet her. Her voice carried that rare fragility I had seen before, the one she usually masked with poise. I nodded, unsure if I wanted the revelation or feared it. Someone saw us," she admitted, eyes downcast, fingers twisting a scarf she had wrapped around her neck. "At the bookstore. A friend. They might think." I felt a jolt, a cold spike through my chest. And yet, even with the words spoken, even with the risk suddenly glaring between us, the pull didn't weaken. My fingers itched to reach for hers, to steady her, but I held back, afraid of the world's judgment as much as I feared her reaction. She looked up, meeting my eyes for the first time in what felt like hours, and the moment cut deeper than any confession could. Her shoulder brushed mine as she shifted on the bench, faint sparks of heat flaring through the simple contact. I wanted to lean in, wanted to close that space, but hesitation pinned me in place. "I shouldn't feel this way," she whispered, voice trembling. "But I do, more than I expected. And now, it's complicated." Her admission was like a match to dry kindling. My chest tightened, pulse quickening. I wanted to tell her I felt the same, that every glance, every brush of our hands, every stolen breath had pulled me closer than I'd ever thought possible. But the words caught in my throat. Instead, I swallowed hard, letting my body betray me where my voice could not. I shifted just enough that my knee brushed hers. Her intake of breath was soft but unmistakable. I could feel the tension vibrating in her, the mix of fear, desire, and hesitation. And yet, despite the risk, despite the revelation, I leaned slightly closer, drawn to her warmth like a moth to a flame. She mirrored me in the slightest, just enough that our shoulders pressed, just enough that I could smell the faint vanilla in her hair. My fingers twitched, wanting to reach out, to touch, to close the remaining gap. She didn't move away. She let the closeness linger, heavy with possibility, heavy with risk. "I don't know if we should," she breathed, voice low, trembling. "And yet we do," I said, barely above a whisper. The words felt dangerous, reckless, but the pull between us overpowered caution. A silence fell, dense and charged. I watched her chest rise and fall, the curve of her lips caught between fear and temptation. The bench beneath us suddenly felt too small, too confining, the world outside irrelevant. Then, almost imperceptibly, we leaned toward each other, closer than ever, hearts hammering, breaths mingling. And in that suspended heartbeat, we both knew whatever came next could not be undone. The rain had stopped, leaving the city slick and glistening under the streetlights. We stood on the sidewalk outside her apartment, the air cool, heavy with the scent of wet asphalt and lingering perfume. The world around us had receded. No sounds, no people, just the hum of electricity between us. We were inches apart. My hand twitched at the small space between us, aching to reach for her. Her gaze held mine, steady, unflinching, though I could see the conflict dancing there. Desire, caution, fear, longing. The tension was a living thing, coiling around our hearts, refusing to be ignored. "I can't. I don't know if I should," she whispered, voice trembling, breath warm against my cheek. "Neither can I admitted, voice low, hoarse, carrying the weight of every thought I tried to suppress. "But I can't step back either." Her hand lifted slowly, uncertain, hovering near my chest. The mere proximity made my skin prickle, heart hammering as though it might betray me. I could feel the warmth radiating from her, the faint scent of vanilla and cedar enveloping me. Every instinct screamed to close the distance, to let the world vanish around us, but the line between courage and recklessness wavered like a tightrope. We lingered, frozen, breathing the same air, each waiting for the other to make the first move. My fingers brushed a strand of hair from her face, tentative, deliberate, and I caught the quiver of reaction that betrayed her own desire. She leaned into the touch just slightly, almost imperceptibly, and the ache in my chest deepened. I've never felt this with anyone," she confessed, voice barely a whisper, eyes glistening with something I couldn't name entirely. Relief, fear, longing, maybe all three. "I know," I breathed, closing the last fraction of distance between us, careful yet desperate. "Me neither." Her hand finally settled on my arm, the weight of it grounding both of us. We were balanced on the edge of something that could break us, something that could transform everything. My lips hovered near hers, the world shrinking until only the heat of her skin, the rise and fall of her chest, the rhythm of her heartbeat existed. And then, finally, we exhaled together, a shaky, shared surrender. Not with words, not with promises, but with the undeniable magnetism that had pulled us to this point. Every fear, every hesitation, every social boundary melted away, leaving only the raw human connection between us. In that moment, clarity came, sharp and simple. We understood each other fully. The attraction, the risk, the thrill, the vulnerability. All of it was real, undeniable, and worth everything. We didn't need to speak further. The closeness, the trembling hands, the silent acknowledgement of everything unspoken. That was enough. For the first time, we were not holding back. The morning after, sunlight spilled softly across her living room, dust motes drifting lazily in the quiet. We sat side by side on the couch, shoulders touching, legs almost brushing. The air between us was warm, familiar now, free from the tension that had haunted the past weeks. She reached out first, threading her fingers through mine. The gesture was simple, but it carried everything we had been too afraid to say aloud. Longing, fear, desire, and finally, surrender. I tightened my grip gently, careful not to rush the moment, letting it linger. I didn't think it could feel like this, she murmured, voice soft, almost shy. Her head leaned lightly against my shoulder, and I felt the weight of her trust settle there, grounding me. I didn't either, I admitted, resting my head near hers, mindful of every small movement, every breath. But it does. We sat in silence for a while, letting the morning stretch between us, unspoken but full of everything we discovered. I could feel the subtle rise and fall of her chest, the gentle warmth of her hand in mine. There was no rush, no dramatic declarations, just the honest human closeness that had been building since the first accidental brush of our fingers in that café. She tilted her head up slightly, and I met her gaze. Her eyes, calm now, reflected the depth of the weeks we had navigated. All the stolen glances, hesitant touches, and silent confessions. I brushed a loose strand of hair from her face, letting my thumb linger against her cheek. She leaned into it, her lips curving in a soft, quiet smile. "I'm glad we didn't let it slip away," she whispered, voice barely audible, but each word resonating like a secret finally shared. "Neither am I," I said, and without thinking, I pressed my forehead gently against hers, feeling the pulse of her heartbeat match mine. It was a simple act, but it said everything we needed to know. Time seemed to fold in on itself. We stayed like that, hands intertwined, shoulders pressed together, breathing in tandem. The age gap, the hesitation, the fear of what others might think. All of it felt insignificant here, in this quiet, suspended bubble where only we existed. Finally, she sighed softly, nestling closer, and I wrapped an arm around her, holding her as if we were both fragile and magnificent at once. It was messy, imperfect, human, and perfect in its honesty. For the first time, we were simply together, fully seen, fully understood. The world outside could wait, and as sunlight touched her hair, glinting gold, I knew that we had found something worth every risk. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?